Greetings, welcome to the Rash Child channel. I'm Ash, and today hopefully I'm clearing up any questions you have about this, the 2 notes torpedo CAPTOR X. Now lucky for you, it's 2022 and the options available for guitarists these days are immense. In this video I really want to clear up how to use the actual CAPTOR X and how to do the inputs and the outputs, but also dive into what other options you have. This is not a sponsored video, and as someone who is a member of many groups of guitars and amps and things like that, I often hear many basic beginner questions that could hopefully be cleared up by a good YouTube search, hopefully this video. So in future you don't have to worry about making a question on a Facebook group and getting attacked by noob questions. So if you're up to this point and already own the CAPTOR X and just want to know how to do the inputs and the outputs, just skip ahead to the chapters that are marked in the bottom of the video. But for those of you who are curious and are thinking of maybe purchasing one, before we actually go into that, let's talk about other options first. So the options we have is number 1, people who just want to jam at home, bedroom players. Number 2, people who play gigs and want to rehearse and things like that. And number 3, the focus is on recording only. So let's look at that. Now let's use a buzzword here, which is tone. Tone is something that you're going to hear a lot thrown around in guitar communities, and ultimately it is subjective. Some people might think a tone is great, some people might think it sounds bad, but it's all context. Personally, of course I love playing guitar, but the reason why I started playing guitar was not because I wanted to be the greatest guitar player. I just wanted to get the songs that were in my head out into the world, and that's why I started playing. So tone is something that of course I want to have a good sound, but I'm not so zoned in on that. That's all I care about. And that's why I've broken this up into a few categories, because it really does depend on what your goal is. You know, do you just want to record? Do you just want to jam at home? Do you just want to use it for gigs? If so, I don't really feel right recommending something that I don't know what your goal is. And that's why it's important for me to go through each step right now. So let's look at the options that are available in terms of amps and sounds and things like that. Number 1 would be a combo amp, such as the Boss Katana. The amp is honestly amazing. There is a bunch of different versions. There's a 50 watt, 100 watt, even a head, and they do everything. They have a headphone out, so you can plug your headphones in and play at home. They also have a 0.5 setting, so if you want to just play in your home, you still have the option of having a 100 watt amp, but you can dial it all the way down to 0.5 watts and you can play at home, no problem with sound volume, and still keep the tone. They also come with a bunch of effects, built-in delays and reverbs and things like that. You can plug it into your computer and download a bunch of sounds. It's fantastic. The price range is around $200 US to about $600 depending on the amp, but if you're someone who just wants to stay at home and play headphones on, I highly recommend getting something like a Boss Katana, because it can cover so many bases. If you want to play at home, you can do that. If you want to record, you can plug it into the USB, no problem. And you can even use it for gigging. Many people are using the Boss Katana for gigs and rehearsals and things like that. Of course, you might need to go up to the 100 watt version, but it's no problem. Great option. Option 2 would be amp sims. Now to do an amp sim, you're going to need a computer, but the price range of these, for example, like Line 6 Helix has a native version, and of course one of the most popular ones, which is Neural DSP. Now modern day amp sims are really good. You know, some people are using them to record albums. I use a lot of the Neural DSP stuff, and they range from about $100 to $150 for one amp sim, but they come with a few amps and effects, and it's quite fun to dive into the different sounds. The Line 6 Helix native is a little bit more expensive, but you basically get all amps, all effects, and anything you want in this one package. It's definitely worth it. But to use this, you will need an audio interface and a computer. So for you beginners out there, audio interface is very simply just a device that you use to connect the guitar to the computer. Now for the Neural DSP ones, you can literally just open them up as a application and play from there. You don't need to use the DAW. Once again, beginners, DAW is a digital audio workstation, which is just a thing you use to record. Things such as Pro Tools, Cubase, Logic, Reaper. In terms of rehearsals and gigging, I have seen it done, but you need to be quite savvy with a computer, and it does have its own problems. So if you are a bedroom player, I highly recommend using the amp sims, because they're just so convenient. Next we have the modular devices, such as the Axe Effects, the Kemper, the Neural DSP Quad Cortex, Line 6 Helix, which are essentially just amp sims in a box. Super basic, but that's basically what they are. These are really popular with modern players for many reasons, from touring musicians to regular gigging musicians. They're super convenient. If you are a gigging musician, then these are probably the best way to go, because you can cover all bases in a much smaller package than you would in terms of having an amp or, you know, a computer or something like that. Now, a lot of tone purists out there don't like these because they're digital, and in a lot of cases they do take a while to actually dial in, but in most cases, if you spend the time with them, you can get them really close to the actual amp sound that they're trying to model. Now, some of the drawbacks in there is the option paralysis, because in a lot of cases there's so many amps and so many sounds, you can just spend all your time just looking for sounds and not actually playing anything. So some of the upsides of these is that in the modern days, CD sales have gone away, right? So a lot of income for bands is basically gone. Now, if you're traveling from America to Japan or something like that, and if you're taking a cab and an amp, you know, it's quite a lot of money. I mean, it's thousands of dollars that it would cost to take. Now, if you can just take your entire gig in a small little box and take it on the plane with you, why wouldn't you do that? When the audience doesn't really care, because the sound is going to be like 99% close to the actual sound of the real amp anyway, so it's a no-brainer. And the same goes for non-famous bands. You know, if you're a gigging band, you can just go to the venue, plug into the PA, and then get everything from the monitor. And do they sound as good as the real thing? You know, of course not 100%, but once again, why are you playing guitar? Are you in a band because you just want people to look at you as a guitar player and think, oh, my tone's so amazing? Or are you trying to make a band that makes songs, the music that people want to listen to? It's very difficult to go against modulars in today's day. The other option you have is the old school version: the guitar, the amp, the cabinet, and the microphone. All the things I've just talked about, the modular amps and the amp synths, they're all basing their sound on the real thing, right? So it's very difficult to beat it in terms of the actual sound, but the drawbacks are quite big, aren't they? Nothing beats a valve amp, tube amp, plugged into a cabinet, blasting out. That energy that it gives out is amazing. But the drawbacks are the whole reason that the other things exist in the first place. Now, a big question regarding amps you'd always hear is, what's the difference between a 100 watt amp, a 50 watt amp, and a 20 watt amp? And if you're a home player, you can't use either of them really, unless you live in the countryside where no one's around. But if you live in an apartment or in a room where people are around, you know, it's always going to be too loud, just a bit too loud always, especially the 100 and the 50. It's almost impossible to use those at home. And the thing about tube amps is that you need to turn them up to a certain volume to really hit that sweet spot where it sounds good. And the problem with that is if you do that with most amps, you know, your neighbor's steak is going to fall off his fork. So it's, you know, just not a good idea to do, right? So if you're lucky to live somewhere where noise is not a problem, then go mental. You know, if you're a home player, buy a nice big 100 watt amp and a cabinet and go mental. You'll love it. But if you don't live in such a place, then your amps are just going to gather dust and you're never going to use them other than, you know, a few gigs now and again. And another thing about amps is that if you're playing a gig and you're on a stage, most people are playing smaller kind of stages. So having a stage volume, you need to turn up the amp to the sweet spot, which is usually too loud for the stage sound. So the sound engineer that's trying to make your band sound good is always fighting against the amps on the stage, because, you know, of course it feels good to have the amp right turned up, right? But in terms of what the audience is listening to, you're not going to sound as good. You know, once again, priority. What are you trying to do? Do you only care about yourself and just playing guitar and being cool? Or are you in a band that wants to have a good sound? But it really is hard to beat, you know, an amp, mic and cabinet all mic'd up. Recording a guitar amp is not as simple as just putting a microphone in front of a cabinet. There is an art to it, you know. The recording engineers are skilled people. To really capture a good drum sound or a good guitar sound, you need someone who knows exactly what they're doing and can actually capture it. You can't just stick a mic in front of it and hope for the best. It's not going to work. Unless you know what you're doing, you're not really going to get the sound that you really want. So this is where this comes in, the middle ground. The old school meets the new school. Being able to listen to your cranked tube amp through headphones, through your monitors, no problem. Essentially, this thing is going to replace your cabinet. You get your guitar head, you plug it into here, and then from here, it can go into a few places. Into the DAW, into your computer for recording. If you're playing live, straight into the PA, or just stick some headphones on and listen to your amp that way. Remember, if you do have a tube amp, never just turn it on when it's not connected to a cabinet. It's a very bad idea. So there is a regular version called the CAPTOR, which is basically just a load box. Now, basically for you beginners out there, all it's doing is taking the basic sound of your amp with no cabinet sound. So it'll sound like this. Not what you're going for, right? See, because there's no cabinet sound. So you need something like a cabinet simulator. So the basic version just has that. So if you wanted to use a cabinet sound for live or recording, you would need something like the Cab M, which is a speaker simulator, or plug it into your computer and in your DAW, open up an IR loader. IR stands for impulse response, which is basically just a speaker sound. So you can choose whichever speaker sound you want. Now the load boxes come in usually 4 ohm, 8 ohm and 16 ohm. Double check which one your amp needs, but most people would need the 8, which is the most common one. Now the CAPTOR X has a built-in IR loader and cab simulator. Today there are a few options such as the UAD aux box, the Boss TAE and the Sir Reactive Load, as well as the CAPTOR X. Now the reality is you can't go wrong with any of these, but there are a few differences in terms of what they offer and of course price. The CAPTOR X and the Sir Reactive Load are around $600, whereas the Boss and the aux box come in at around $1,500, so almost double the price. The general difference is the aux box has a built-in cab simulator that you cannot change. You can't add in your own sounds, but from what I've heard, they're very high quality and sound great. The Boss TAE, on the other hand, has so many options. It's like a spaceship basically. And once again, it depends on what you need. If you're looking for those options, such as, you know, you want to have a built-in power amp and all these effects loops and things like that, go for those. The Sir Reactive Load is basically the same as the CAPTOR X minus a few things. One of the options that the CAPTOR X has is an attenuator. The attenuator just being something which knocks your amp volume down a few dBs. And honestly, I've used my one here in my home and it's still a little bit too loud. But if you're playing live and you still want to have a cabinet on stage, you can use the CAPTOR X to plug directly into the PA through one input, and the other output could go into the cabinet, and you can still knock down the volume a little bit and still have the compressed sound that you really want to have, but also have a low stage volume. So it's very, very good for that. So as I said, this is not a sponsored video, but if you do some research and looking at other YouTube videos, you might find the consensus that overall, the other ones do sound a little bit better than the CAPTOR X. So how does the CAPTOR X compete and why am I talking about it? Now, firstly, it's the size. The size is very, very small, can easily fit on top of your amp, and it's just very, very portable. Now, of course, because it's smaller, it might be possible that the components inside are less of a high quality as its other competitors. But for me, after using it for quite a while with many different amps, it's very easy to achieve a sound I want with the certain features inside and also in the software. So let's look at the output, shall we? Now we can see that there is a 12 VDC 200 milliamp power input. I'm actually using a One Spot Pro to actually power this, and there's no problems with that. So it can also fit on your pedal board if you needed to. Just remember too that the power is only controlling the cabinet section and the software inside. If you wanted to use the actual, just the load box, for example, your amp straight into here, you still can. For example, if it rips the cord out or something like that, it's not going to damage the amp, so don't worry about that. It'd still be connected to the load. We have a MIDI in too, which would be for controlling via MIDI, you know, if you wanted to choose certain effects and certain cabinets that you've saved on the amp, no problem. USB, of course, this does also come with an app on your phone. If you want to use the phone app, you can do that too, but also you can just plug into the USB, no problem here. The speaker out right here goes straight into your cabinet. So you would plug this into the cabinet and then you can control it with the volume here. So lowest would be, you know, attenuated. I think it's about 20 or 15. I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's the full would be at the top. So that would be the full volume of the amp and then halfway down. On the right is the fan. Now the fan does make a bit of noise. It might be a bit jarring at first, but don't worry, it's not a problem. We have a little ground lift here just in case you're having any problems with electronics in your house. And now the two outputs, very important, okay? Now, the left output is basically has the built-in amp sound and cabinet sound baked into it. So whatever cabinet sound is that you are using will be baked into this input. So the left output is the main output that you want to use if you're using the built-in sound here. The right output, it can do the same thing, but you can also turn off the cabinet sound. What's good about that is, for example, if you wanted to record something, but you're not sure you want to commit to the actual amp sound, you could just record both inputs at the same time, and the left one would have, you know, the sound that you have. Then the right one, you just turn off the actual cabinet sound, and it's acting almost as kind of like a DI, not a true DI, but the raw sound. And later, if you wanted to add a different cabinet effect, you can. Now to demonstrate this, I'm going to be using my EVH5150 back here, and we're just going to do some sound examples and show you how the software works. Now remember, don't just crank your amp up to 10. Get it to the spot where it sounds the best and go from there. You don't need to raise the volume, as if we look at the front panel, now this is the output here. Now the output of course controls the level of the output coming from the amp and into the software or into the PA. So if it flashes red, you know it's clipping, and also you can see on the software if it's red. So if it's red, be careful and turn it down a little bit. The voicing is kind of like a mid bump. Let's just listen to it. And the space controls the wideness of the overall sound, because there are a few features on here which we'll go into in a second that you could use that for. There's also a gate, which since I've used the gate, I've actually not used my gate pedals. It just does the job really, really well. Now in terms of the inputs, the first one we have is dual mono. Now dual mono means that basically you can send the left one to the PA and the right one to your own personal mix for in-ears, and you can control the EQ there too and have your own personal sound. Also for just recording in general, like I just said, you can turn off and bypass the cabinet sound and record them both at the same time, and then you've always got kind of like a just in case you want to change the sound part there. It's very, very good. Also in your DAW, you can just pan the left one left and the right one right, and you can have kind of like a faux stereo sound. Now here's the stereo sound. That's both inputs into one basic track. Sounds really, really good. And now one of the best features of the CAPTOR X is the twin tracker, which is basically, guys, if you actually think it's stereo, it's not true stereo. For true stereo, you need 2 amps and you would need 2 CAPTOR X's. But so you would have, one dry and one wet or something like that. But this is kind of a faux stereo effect. So it sounds like in your head, in your earphones or on the monitors. From what I understand, it's basically putting one of the tracks a few milliseconds behind, and it just sounds like it's stereo. It sounds really cool. Now, if you're using headphones, you just put it on and it sounds like this already. But if you're using it in your DAW, just pan one left and one right and you can get the effect. The reverb is self-explanatory. I think it sounds really good for what you want. No shimmer effect or anything like that, but as for a standard reverb, it sounds really cool. Of course, the enhancer and the EQ section means that you can really shape your sound and add in anything you want. Two Notes has a bunch of sounds. You don't have to use IRs. I personally like using IRs, but you can use the built-in cabinet effects and things like that. Basically, if you really want to use your amp and still want to, play at home or gigs, whatever, I highly recommend it. Anyways, hopefully that's helpful to some, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.